Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun to Nuns. Today we're in Ezra chapter number 5, so let's get started.
Okay, whenever you're reading through Ezra chapter 5, you're getting a glimpse of kind of Ezra the scribe. So what is a scribe? I think that's going to help us with this. A scribe is basically a clerk. So he is educated and he's like part historian, part journalist, part editorial writer, part like mailman, part teacher, all of it. So he is a guy that probably is more comfortable sitting at a desk with scrolls and books than he is with people. And yet in this story, God is positioning Ezra to show up and really be a leader among his people. And it's kind of one of those pieces of evidence that God usually calls people to do things where they have to fully depend on him. So was Ezra probably more comfortable sitting in a library? Yes. Does he end up being a leader among the people? Yes. But also notice he hasn't even shown up in the book yet. And so even though he's writing this, he knows that himself, he is not the central character of this story. The only central character, because at the beginning of the book, you have the high priest and the governors, Zerubbabel and Jeshua. Then you have Ezra, and then you have Nehemiah. The only constant figure throughout this book is God. And so since Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one book, this is the story of God bringing his people out of exile, like symbolically out of Egypt again and back to the promised land. And the goal is to rebuild the temple. Now, as you get into this, you understand like Ezra writes this from probably the way he looked at life. So he's a scribe, so guess what he does? He takes official documents and he's putting them into the book so that, because in his mind, he goes, well, the best way to explain it is, what does the paperwork say? Like he is a paperwork guy. In our minds, like if he was a lawyer or an IRS agent, like an accountant or something, like he's detail oriented. So he goes, I'm going to show you the facts. All right. So that's kind of how you view the overarching tone of this deal, because this is the chapter 5 gives us another letter that he gives. He didn't even write it, but he includes it so that we know what's happening. Jackson, what was your takeaway from this?
Okay. So basically in this chapter, we see these people, they're trying to rebuild the temple like God said. But we also have these people that are opposing them. And they're trying to get the king to veto like building this temple. And so this is like really a good picture of what we see like oftentimes when we're trying to follow God's will and do what he says. There's always going to be like some kind of opposition towards us, and someone's going to try to stop us.
That's right. So Tony Evans used to say, he said, you know, a dog never barks at a parked car. Like dogs bark at driving cars, okay? So don't let it surprise you that now that the people are deciding to obey God, the enemy shows up again, because that's going to happen in your life too. I want you to also notice when you begin this story, remember, you've got the ministry of Haggai and Zechariah. And by the way, we've just finished reading these guys, especially Haggai. Remember, Haggai was the guy, he's come along and he's preaching asking, why aren't y'all building the temple? You've built your houses, you've built your businesses, you may have even taken supplies meant to build the temple and built your own houses. He said, why do you get a house but God doesn't get a house? Why do you come first? And so the people are convicted, and so they begin to build. And I read this, like as a preacher, I read this and I'm once again encouraged that we ought to never underestimate the power of preaching God's word and how it can take a people that weren't doing what they ought to do, and now they're excited to serve the Lord. Now, the other piece to this is there's this question the bad guys ask when they get there, and they say, who told you to build this temple? They ask that in verse number 3. Well, what's the answer to that? Who told them to build the temple? God. So Haggai and Zechariah might have been there, but they're a relay. They were mailmen. They didn't write the mail. They just delivered it. And so the people are responding to God. Now I want you to notice this letter that these guys write, because this is classic like politics. They had their theory and they had their way, but they're playing politics. For instance, it's a passive-aggressive letter. When you look in verse number 8, it says, let it be known to the king that we went to the province of Judea to the temple of the great God, which is being built with heavy stones. They're implying they're building a fortress, right? Because the king might hear, oh, they're trying to rebel. So they're building it with heavy stones, and timber is being laid in the wall, and the work goes on diligently and prospers in their hands. Well, this is a passive-aggressive way of saying, hey, king, do you think these guys, because we do you think these people are plotting on you? They're going to go rogue. They're trying to build fortresses. So it's a passive-aggressive way to make the king think that the Jews are a threat. Well, then it's not only passive-aggressive, they're also trying to intimidate. So when they write this letter, they're like, oh, we're just trying to do our research. So in verse 10, they say, or in verse 10, they say, so we asked them their names to inform you. Well, think about how intimidating that is to these Jewish guys who say, hey, we're going to write a letter to the king and we're going to tattle on you guys. And they said, and by the way, give us your names so that we can let the king know exactly who's doing it. So they're trying to intimidate. The other thing they're doing is they're trying to accuse them. Look in verse number 11. And thus they returned an answer. Because remember, their question was, who told you to build this temple? All right. So verse 11 was, and they returned to us an answer saying, we are servants of the God of heaven and earth. What are they implying? They don't serve you, king. They serve a different king. So not only are they building a fortress, and not only are they gathering people, and not only are they continuing on, but they don't serve you. They think they're above you. All of this is meant to incite a riot. But I'm going to tell you, here's how it backfires. So their last little gamble is, hey, king, we just want to make sure these guys are telling the truth. Will you go look in the records and make sure that they're telling us the truth, that they really do have the king's permission to do this? And then it says at the end of this thing, it says, and the king, in the beginning of chapter 6, he issues a decree to go search out. And you know what he's going to find? He's going to find that his predecessor, Cyrus, did send them back. And so what these guys were intending to shut the work down, once the king finds that the law was made that they had to go back and build this temple, it's going to blow up from there, because then he's the spoiler alert, he's going to write a letter saying, don't you mess with them. Matter of fact, you start giving your tax money to them and you pay for what they're doing, because that's what's going on. Listen, all things work together for good for those that love God and are called according to his purpose. I want you to say, this is every time God's people decide to start obeying him, the enemy shows up. But you think God is afraid of the enemy? No, no, no. What he means for evil, God will turn for good. And so we're going to pick up, the plot thickens. We're going to talk about this a little more the next time we read chapter number 6. Have a great weekend. Bye.